My beloved child, do not scroll past this moment, because something has shifted behind the scenes, and the person connected to your heart is no longer standing where they stood yesterday. A conversation took place that changed the atmosphere around them. It was only a phone call at first, something they almost ignored, something they believed would last only a few ordinary minutes. But when they finally answered, the words coming through that phone reached a place inside them that had been guarded for far too long. And before that call ended, they understood something about you that they could no longer pretend not to see. Stay here, because what they were told about you did not simply surprise them. It forced them to reconsider the people around them, the stories they had accepted, and the distance they had allowed to exist between their heart and yours. There are moments, beloved, when one sentence can undo months of confusion. One truth can expose every assumption that came before it. This was one of those moments. Your soulmate had been carrying questions about you in silence. They may have smiled in front of others. They may have acted as though everything was fine. They may even have convinced themselves that time would eventually make their feelings easier to understand. Yet whenever the noise disappeared, whenever the room became quiet, whenever they were alone with their own thoughts, your presence returned. Your memory returned. The things you said returned. Even the things you never said seemed to return. And something inside them kept whispering that the story they had been given about you was incomplete. What happened during that phone call confirmed the feeling they had tried to ignore. The person speaking to them did not begin by talking about love. They did not begin by telling your soulmate what decision to make. Instead, they mentioned something from the past, something connected to you that your soulmate had never fully understood. At first, your soulmate remained quiet. They listened carefully, almost defensively, because they were afraid of where the conversation was going. But then another detail was revealed. And another. Each one challenged something they had believed. Each one made their heart beat a little faster. Suddenly, moments that once seemed confusing began making sense. Your silence began making sense. Your distance began making sense. Even certain choices you made, choices they once questioned, started appearing differently. And then came the sentence that changed everything. The voice on the other end said something about your character. Not your appearance. Not your success. Not what other people think about you. They spoke about the person you are when nobody is watching. They described a strength your soulmate had sensed but never fully recognized. They explained that you had carried more than you ever showed. That you had protected people without asking to be praised. That you had remained quiet in situations where you could have defended yourself by exposing everything, yet you chose dignity instead. And when your soulmate heard this, they stopped speaking. There was a long silence. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when the heart realizes it has been wrong about something important. Your soulmate looked around at the people who had been influencing their thoughts. They remembered conversations in which your name had been mentioned casually. They remembered little comments disguised as concern. They remembered opinions that had slowly entered their mind until they could no longer tell which thoughts were truly theirs and which had been planted there by someone else. And suddenly they began seeing the pattern. Beloved, this is where the story changed. They realized that not everyone who had spoken about you actually understood you. Some people had judged your silence because they did not know what you were protecting. Some interpreted your boundaries as coldness because they had never experienced the battles that taught you to create those boundaries. Some saw your independence and assumed you did not care, when in truth you had simply learned not to beg for a place in anyone's life. Others looked at your strength and failed to recognize the tenderness hidden beneath it. But your soulmate remembered. They remembered the way your energy changed when you cared deeply. They remembered the moments when your eyes revealed something your words were trying to hide. They remembered how even after disappointment, some part of you still tried to understand instead of immediately condemning. They remembered conversations that felt ordinary at the time but suddenly carried new meaning. And the person on that phone call said something your soulmate cannot forget. They said, in essence, that you were not the person everyone had made you out to be. You were someone who had been misunderstood. That word struck deeply. Misunderstood. Your soulmate repeated it silently. They began thinking about every time they had expected you to explain yourself when perhaps you were already exhausted from explaining yourself to people who had decided what they wanted to believe. They thought about the moments when you needed reassurance but instead received questions. They thought about all the times when they had waited for you to prove your intentions rather than trusting what your consistent actions had already shown. And something inside them broke open. Not in fear. Not in destruction. In realization. For the first time, they were not asking, why did they do that? They were asking, what were they going through when they did that? That single change in perspective transformed everything. This is why, after the phone call, your soulmate began pulling away from certain voices around them. They did not announce it dramatically. They did not stand in the middle of a room and declare war against everyone who had ever disagreed with them. No, beloved. Their change was quieter than that, but perhaps even more powerful. They stopped explaining their feelings about you. They stopped asking other people what they thought. They stopped allowing your connection to become a topic for everyone else's opinions. One person tried to bring you up again, expecting the same reaction they had received before. But this time your soulmate did not engage. Another attempted to remind them of an old misunderstanding. Your soulmate simply said they were looking at things differently now. Someone else tried to laugh about the situation, but your soulmate did not laugh. That silence said more than an argument ever could. Because the phone call had awakened something. Your soulmate finally realized that too many people had been standing inside a story that belonged only to two hearts. And for the first time, they wanted everyone else out of it. Beloved, understand the deeper meaning here. There comes a season when love must stop being a committee decision. A connection cannot breathe when every emotion is carried into a room full of outside opinions. Sometimes two people lose each other not because their hearts were empty, but because too many voices became louder than what their hearts already knew. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize this. They are remembering what they felt before anyone commented on it. Before anyone gave advice. Before anyone warned them. Before anyone told them what you supposedly meant. Before fear entered the picture. There was something simple there. A pull. A recognition. A strange sense of familiarity they could never properly explain. Perhaps they tried to dismiss it. Perhaps they told themselves they were imagining things. Perhaps they believed creating distance would make the feeling disappear. Yet every attempt to move away seemed to reveal how deeply the connection had already affected them. And now the phone call has brought them back to that original feeling. But there is something else you need to understand. The person who called did not only defend you. They revealed something your soulmate did not know you had done. Something quiet. Something you never used as leverage. Something that proved your feelings had been deeper than your soulmate realized. When they heard it, they asked the person to repeat themselves. "Wait, what did you say?" The person repeated it. Your soulmate's expression changed. They leaned back, completely still, because suddenly one of the most confusing chapters between you made sense. There had been a moment when your soulmate assumed you did not care enough. They believed you had chosen distance because your feelings were weak. They may have even told themselves that if you truly cared, you would have done more, said more, reached out differently, or fought harder. But what they discovered on that call was almost the opposite. You had stepped back because you cared. You had restrained yourself because you did not want to force something that needed to be chosen freely. You had allowed space because some part of you understood that chasing someone who was confused would only create more confusion. And while you were silent, you were not indifferent. You were carrying your own questions. Your own sadness. Your own hope. Your own private conversations with heaven, asking whether this connection was meant to teach you something or become something. Your soulmate never saw that part. Until now. The caller revealed that you had once defended your soulmate when you could easily have spoken badly about them. You had an opportunity to expose their weaknesses, their mistakes, perhaps even the ways they had hurt you. But instead, you protected their dignity. When your soulmate heard that, their eyes filled with emotion. Because they remembered how often other people had done the opposite. They remembered how quickly people spread personal details whenever relationships became complicated. They remembered how easily affection could turn into bitterness when expectations were not met. Yet you had held things close. You had kept certain matters private. You had protected what was sacred even when the connection itself felt uncertain. And suddenly they understood something terrifyingly beautiful. You had been loyal in ways they never witnessed. That realization followed them long after the call ended. They placed the phone down, but their mind would not settle. They walked from one room to another. They replayed the conversation. They picked up their phone again. And yes, beloved, they looked at your name. For a moment their thumb hovered over it. They wanted to reach out. But then another emotion surfaced. Regret. Not the kind that destroys hope, but the kind that forces honesty. They began thinking about how many opportunities had passed while they were waiting for perfect certainty. How many times could they have spoken openly but chose silence? How many times did fear make decisions for them? How many nights had both of you perhaps wondered about the same thing while assuming the other person no longer cared? They started typing. Then stopped. Deleted it. Typed again. Stopped again. Because suddenly, "Hey" felt too small. "How are you" felt too ordinary. "I've been thinking about you" did not come close to describing what was happening inside them. They wanted to explain everything. The doubts. The outside voices. The misunderstanding. The phone call. The revelation. The way their perspective changed in a matter of minutes. But they were afraid that putting everything into one message would sound unbelievable. So they sat there staring at the screen. And this is where something extraordinary began happening within them. They stopped worrying about whether you would immediately understand. Instead, they started asking themselves whether they were finally ready to tell the truth. The truth about how deeply you affected them. The truth about why they pulled away. The truth about how many times they checked for your presence without admitting it. The truth about how often they imagined what they would say if life placed the two of you face to face again. They are discovering that the greatest obstacle between you may never have been lack of feeling. It may have been fear of feeling too much. Beloved, some people are prepared for attraction but not for recognition. They are prepared for companionship but not for a connection that forces them to confront themselves. Your soulmate may have expected love to feel comfortable, predictable, easy to categorize. Then you appeared, and suddenly emotions they had neatly organized became impossible to control. You did not fit inside their old definitions. That frightened them. Not because something was wrong with you. Because something about you reached places they had spent years avoiding. Your presence challenged them to become emotionally honest. Your absence challenged them even more. And now, through a phone call they nearly did not answer, a door has opened that they cannot easily close again. Afterward, one of the people closest to them noticed their changed mood. "You okay?" Your soulmate nodded. But the person could see something was different. Their expression was softer but distant, like their thoughts were somewhere else. Something happened? Again your soulmate hesitated. Then they said a sentence that surprised even themselves. "I think I listened to too many people." Those words mattered. Because accountability had begun. They were no longer blaming timing. They were no longer blaming circumstances. They were no longer saying everything between you was simply too complicated. They were beginning to see where they had surrendered their own intuition. And once a person recognizes where they abandoned their truth, it becomes very difficult to return to pretending. This is why certain relationships around them now feel different. Conversations that once influenced them no longer carry the same power. Advice they accepted automatically is being questioned. They are noticing who speaks from genuine care and who speaks from their own unresolved experiences. They are separating wisdom from projection. And you, beloved, have become the center of a question they can no longer ignore. What if I misunderstood them? That question soon became another. What if they were protecting themselves because I gave them reasons to? Then another. What if they cared more than I ever knew? And finally, what if I still have time to make this right? That final question changed the energy completely. Because now your soulmate is not merely remembering. They are considering action. Yet something happened before they could reach out. Another message appeared on their phone. It came from someone they had recently begun distancing themselves from. The timing was almost uncanny. The message mentioned you. Your soulmate stared at it. Only hours earlier, they might have responded immediately, asking questions, allowing the conversation to expand. This time they saw it differently. They saw the familiar pattern, someone presenting an opinion as though it were a fact. Someone expecting your soulmate to accept a version of you they had not personally confirmed. But this time your soulmate did something they had never done before. They challenged it. Do you actually know that? There was a delay. Then the person responded vaguely. They had heard something. Someone else had said something. They assumed. They thought. They believed. No certainty. No direct knowledge. And your soulmate felt something click into place. How many decisions had been influenced by rumors wearing the clothing of truth? How many times had assumptions been repeated until they sounded factual? How many moments between you had been judged by people who never knew what happened when nobody else was present? Your soulmate felt a mixture of disappointment and clarity. They did not continue arguing. They simply ended the conversation. And afterward, one by one, they began reducing access. Not because they suddenly hated everyone. Because they finally understood that peace sometimes requires closing the door to unnecessary noise. There were people they stopped replying to. A group conversation they muted. Someone they had relied on for relationship advice suddenly no longer felt like the right person to consult. Your soulmate was not cutting people away from anger. They were cutting away interference. And for the first time in a long time, their mind became quiet enough to hear their own heart. Do you know what their heart said? Your name. Not literally as a voice in the room, beloved, but as a memory that refused to disappear. Your smile. A conversation. A moment of eye contact. Something you once said that seemed insignificant at the time. They remembered it all. And then something happened that almost made them laugh through the emotion. They realized you had tried to tell them part of this truth before. Maybe not directly. Maybe not dramatically. But there had been clues. You had once said something about needing honesty. Or trust. Or not wanting outsiders to define what existed between you. At the time, your soulmate heard the words. Now they understood them. That is the strange thing about truth, sometimes a person can hear it months before they are ready to receive it. And now they were ready. But the phone call still had one final revelation. A revelation I have not yet told you. Because the person who called your soulmate did not contact them randomly. There was a reason they chose this particular moment. Something had happened recently that made them believe your soulmate needed to know the truth immediately. They had been holding information for a while. They were uncertain whether they should interfere. They wondered whether revealing it would make things better or worse. But then they saw something. Something connected to you. Something that convinced them silence was no longer helpful. So they made the call. And near the end, when your soulmate asked why they were telling them all of this now, the person took a breath and said, "Because there is something else you don't know." Your soulmate froze. The room became completely still. What? The caller hesitated. Your soulmate sat forward. Tell me. And then the person revealed that while your soulmate had been questioning your feelings, you had quietly made a decision about them. A decision nobody expected. A decision you may not even realize has already begun changing the direction of this connection. Your soulmate listened without interrupting, and when the caller finished the first sentence, they covered their mouth in disbelief. Because what they heard finally explained why the energy between you has felt so different lately. But the most shocking part was still coming. The caller said, "There is one more thing. And before I tell you, you need to understand this was never about them not loving you." Your soulmate whispered, "Then what was it?" There was silence on the line. A long, unbearable silence. And then the voice answered, "The truth is, they were preparing to